Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. Part 6. Suigetsu felt uneasy. He could not describe the heavy dread that settled in his stomach as Sasuke maneuvered around the room, both of them alert. The air was heavy, and something smelt unattractively sweet, like honey mixed with some sort of heavy spice. Deep within his gut, Suigetsu got the feeling that it wasn't Hyuga Astra's perfume that permeated the air. Smell that? Suigetsu asked. No, was Sasuke's curt reply, just as the Uchiha came to standstill before a painting pinned to the wall. Suigetsu hopped over, and both men stared at the painting in absolute shock. I told ya this woman was a nutter, Suigetsu grumbled. She's messed with our heads, or well, yours. Sasuke grunted, his focus shifting to the various scribbles on the walls. He could not decipher them, and all the mess reminded him of was a psychiatric patient that scratched their madness onto walls. A sense of dizziness overcame him, and he had to shake his head to regain his balance. The writing on the wall suddenly seemed blurry. ... And then Suigetsu collapsed onto the ground in a heap. Funny, Sasuke grumbled. Get up, Suigetsu. But Suigetsu did not respond. Sasuke sighed and kicked the white-haired man's legs, but still no response. Annoyed, he got onto his knees, ready to pummel the stupid bastard. Now was not the time to play silly games, Karen was danger. But just Sasuke felt his knees make contact with the wooden floor, the dizziness increased, and before he knew it everything went black. Kurama had made the decision to share what he knew regarding Shimura Ayaka, and how she had promised him she would gain power and overthrow Naruto. Naruto listened to his story with rapt attention, his finger delicately tapping his chin in thought. When Kurama concluded his retelling, Naruto sighed. Why is there always someone who can't fit inside the box? Nobody ever fits inside the box, Naruto. Your way of thinking is far different from your predecessors, and some of the radical changes you made makes Shimura feel threatened, Kurama replied. What radical changes? Naruto asked. The other Biju and your freedom was a long time coming. Kurama smiled softly at the confession. And we are grateful for it. But that wasn't the only changes you made, and one of your changes has now become Shimura's tool to bite you back. Naruto clicked his tongue as he swiveled in his chair to overlook the village from the window. The High Council was never meant to gain any power over the law. I know, Kurama responded. You recommended the introduction of the High Council to the daimyo for them to act as your advisors and to represent the people to balance the power. It was a good proposal, Naruto, and has served the village well. But something is astray here, and somehow they have become corrupt and are no longer responsible or representative of the village. By astray you mean Ayaka is trying to take control? Naruto queried. Well, yes, but we both know she does not have the power, nor the resources to control the entire High Council alone. There's another factor, someone else in the picture perhaps. Naruto suddenly shot up from his seat as Kurama's words sunk in. Control. Say what? Naruto spun around to look his friend in the eye. That's exactly what it is, someone has used mind manipulation to control the actions of the High Council. Kurama frowned. It was a sound theory, and made the most sense. The members of the High Council were all elected by their clans or the people they represented, and were loyal to Naruto. There was no possible way they could ever have been convinced to turn against him, not with the level of loyalty they had shown before. So, to have such a complete turnover, mind manipulation made the most sense. But Shimura Ayaka had no such power, and Kurama could not think of a single member of the Yamanaka clan who would use their abilities for such dark purposes. So it had to be someone else trained in the art, but who? Naruto's brow furrowed, deep in thought. Truthfully, he had only summoned Kurama to make the High Council quiver in their seats a bit. But now that the fox was here, it would be good to utilize his skills. Yes, that would be good, Naruto replied. But I have another request as well. Kurama quirked an eyebrow, intrigued. Naruto shuffled through some paperwork and finally pulled out a map of the village, a big red dot clearly marking a location in the shopping district. He handed it to Kurama and sat down, arms crossed. Beneko warned me of a foreign chakra residing at that location, Naruto explained. Apparently it is similar to the disrupted chakra flowing through Ino since the transfer of dimensions. I want you to investigate and report any findings. Interesting, Kurama hummed. And if I find the owner of this chakra, arrest them, Naruto stated. I think it's time I have a little chat with this person. Kurama nodded. I'll leave now. Mind if I swing around later to see the kids? Kagaya is on a mission, but Minato will be very happy to see you. Kurama nodded and disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The earth was shaking. Why and how, Suigetsu was not certain of, but something was not right. The world around him was surrounded in darkness, his senses all cut off. He could not see or smell a thing. He was engulfed in a deep black sea. And all he could sense was the feeling of being shaken. Wake up! A voice echoed around him, followed by a stinging sensation in his cheek. Suigetsu blinked, now even more confused. Let me, another voice said, and the stinging sensation, which now felt like a small heated fire, moved from his cheek to his stomach. That seemed to send a jolt through him, and suddenly Suigetsu found himself sitting up, the darkness gone and in its place was the light from windows and two faces that belonged to Uchiha Sasuke and the Kyuubi. What happened? Suigetsu mumbled as he blinked rapidly to get accustomed to the light. We are still at Hyuga Astra's house, Sasuke stated. We passed out. How did we, two Junin level shinobi, manage that? Suigetsu demanded. Had he seriously lost consciousness? He couldn't remember. It's a herb, Kurama stated as he lifted himself from his crouching position and moved around the room. He sniffed the air. It's similar to valerian root, but was specially cultivated by botanists to induce a coma-like state with the senses of smell and sight cut off. Suigetsu pulled a face. And how did Sasuke and I get exposed to this herb? Kurama came to a halt before the painting of Naruto, Hinata and Astra. He stared at it in silence, his expression blank. He then turned to face Sasuke and Suigetsu. This Hyuga woman burns it like incense. I can smell it all through the house. You better get out of here. Suigetsu grumbled. Well, that explains the disgustingly sweet smell I got a whiff of when we got here. No, Sasuke grunted, completely ignoring Suigetsu's comment. I am not leaving until I find my wife. She's in the basement, Kurama stated, his eyes darting to the door that led to the front of the house. I can sense her emotions. But this herb is dangerous. I was able to wake you up with a shock from my chakra, but I can't protect you from its effects. Go, I'll get your wife. Sasuke clenched his fists, the anger boiling beneath the surface of his skin. The damned fox had no right to order him around, not when Karen was involved, but he also knew that Kurama had a point. With that in mind, Sasuke inhaled deeply to calm himself, then nodded slowly. However, just as he turned to Suigetsu so they can leave, a noise echoed through the house. Kurama clicked his tongue. Looks like the owner of the house is back. I can't sense her chakra, Sasuke muttered, which was unusual even for him. Sasuke and Suigetsu glanced at each other, a silent message passing between them. Suigetsu nodded and pulled a flask from his. He would need some hydration if a fight was to break out. Sasuke turned his attention back to Kurama. Kurama seemed to sense what the Uchiha wanted to ask, and he nodded in response. I'll get your wife, Kurama whispered. I'm immune to the herb, so I can move freely around the house. Naruto wants the Hyuga woman in custody, so I'll leave her capture to you. Sasuke nodded. That was exactly what he was going to suggest. Kurama slipped to the doorway and pressed himself against the wall. He listened carefully to Astra's movements, she seemed to be busy in the kitchen. Sasuke and Suigetsu were whispering how they would distract Astra and get her outside so they can escape from the herb's effects. After a plan was formulated, they dispersed, leaving Kurama alone. The sound of Astra's shoes meeting the wooden floors echoed through the house. She seemed to be unaware of the unwanted guests in her house, but Kurama concluded that was due to Sasuke and Suigetsu being intelligent enough to mask their chakra like he did. Or, perhaps, she was aware of their presence and was just taking her time in confronting them. He could hear cutlery brushed together now, which meant she was rummaging through drawers. He knew he could not dawdle. The supposed cutlery could be kunai instead, and could mean the woman was onto them. He quickly slipped down the hall and into the small alcove that led to the basement. He was not familiar with the layout of the house, but the Uchiha's wife's emotions was his guide. The door's lock was a simple deadbolt, and was easily broken without making a sound. He quietly slipped down the stairs and into the large basement. Uchiha Karen looked extremely pale. Her skin was as white as milk. Her rich red hair had no life to it and her wrists were chained to the wall. While she looked exhausted, she did not look ill. At least the Hyuga woman had made sure the redhead got some sustenance. Her piercing red gaze was locked on to him and for a minute he wondered why she looked so calm, and then he remembered that she was an advanced censor, and probably had been aware of his presence from the beginning. He did not utter a word and simply rented the shackles around her wrists in half. She stood up, but stumbled from weakness. He quickly steadied her, and motioned for her to be quiet, which earned him a glare. They both listened to the movement above. Astra had moved from the kitchen and was now in the bedroom. From her calm movements, it could be assumed Sasuke and Suigetsu was yet to make a move. Kurama turned to Karen and explained how they would sneak upstairs and escape through the front door. Astra is a censor, Karen explained. She knows you're here, she's planning something, hence why she hasn't attacked. Kurama frowned. Then in the event she attacks, you escape and leave me behind. Karen blanched. You would do that? For a lowly human? Don't get me started on the human debate, Kurama groaned. Karen chuckled softly, and oddly it reminded him of Yoko's soft melodic laugh. He made a mental note to introduce the two women sometime in the future. He had a feeling they would get along swimmingly. Kurama and Karen slowly made their way up the stairs, Kurama making sure to stay close to Karen to support her if she felt dizzy. The herb's effect was still potent, and could kick in at any moment. They made it to the hallway, where they both hid behind a wall and listened for Astra's movements. Karen frowned when she heard small soft whimpers and whispers coming from the bedroom. Is she talking to someone? Karen asked, keeping her voice low. No, she's alone, Kurama responded. I have a feeling this woman has a few loose screws in her head. That's rude, Karen huffed. Kurama rolled his eyes, but his gaze quickly turned very serious. Karen blinked at the rapid change. What is it? She dared to ask. She's talking to herself, but she keeps saying, Ino, Kurama replied, his brow furrowed as he concentrated. Yeah, Karen hummed. Ino's her target. This alarmed Kurama, and he knew he better get this news to Naruto as soon as possible. He motioned for Karen to slip from the little alcove they were hidden in to the door that led to the front of the house, which he believed was the shop area. Karen nodded and quickly crept down the hallway. Astra did not make a move and remained pacing in her bedroom, the name, Ino, continuing to slip from her lips. Either she was waiting for an opportune moment, or she was so distracted by her insanity that she didn't notice her unwanted guests were on the move. Just as Kurama was ready to join Karen, a loud crack echoed through the house. He froze, expecting Astra to react. React she did, but not to his presence. She cursed loudly, and he heard the back door that led outside slam. He waited a few seconds, and when he heard two kunai blades clash he knew Sasuke and Suigetsu had made their move. He quickly joined Karen, and the two escaped through the front door. The escape had been surprisingly easy, but the herb's effects were taking a toll on Karen. She collapsed once they were outside, and Kurama quickly scooped her into his arms and disappeared into a puff of smoke. He only trusted one woman to help without asking too many questions. He just hoped this younger version of Ino knew medical ninjutsu. The house was quiet without Kagaya, and Minato was very vocal about it. He missed his sister, and had thrown a tantrum that morning before school. It took the whole morning to calm him down, and a bribe with chocolate cake and a new toy later had finally calmed him down. Ino had sighed in relief. She had never expected children to be such a hassle. She was angry that she had to bribe him though, and promised herself she would never do it again. After dropping Minato off at school, Ino had spent the rest of the morning and a portion of the afternoon at work, where Kana had reported that a garden bed had died. The whole 5 hours she had spent at work had been spent on cleaning out the garden, and completely refilling it with fresh soil, fertilizer and replanting the plants that had perished. They were still uncertain what had caused the plants to die, but they all assumed something strange must have gotten into the soil. She then had to write a report for the hospital, explaining that there might be shortage in some medicinal herbs due to the incident. She had received a prompt reply from the director, who was more than content with getting the herbs from an external supply in the meantime. Ino returned home utterly exhausted. After brewing herself a cup of tea and settling on the couch, she dived into the pile of letters that had arrived in the mail. Most of them were bills, completely boring and of no interest. And then she found a letter with familiar cursive writing, the return address from Nadeshiko village. She grinned and quickly ripped the envelope open, happy to see that Shizuka had once again responded to her letters. Salutations Ino. Thank you once again for your letter. It was good to hear more news of Jugo and how he is faring. Kasumi is most anxious to meet him and I must admit, I am also getting restless. I understand that time is always an issue, especially for someone such as yourself, but I was wondering if we could be a bother and come by next week. I am more than content at staying at an inn, for I do not wish to intrude. However, I would very much like it if we share stories over some tea during our visit. I am quite excited at the prospect of meeting you. I shall await your answer patiently. Shizuka of Nadeshiko. Ino quickly jumped up and skipped to the study, where she settled at her desk and wrote her responded to Shizuka. Once it was completed, she pocketed the envelope, locked the house and made her way to the post office. She passed the letter to one of the messengers who was picking up mail to deliver and quickly slipped to the cafe next door to buy a coffee. On her way home, Ino was greeted by some of the villagers, an occurrence she was now accustomed to. She greeted them all in return, and even played catch with a group of children for a few minutes. By the time she was nearing home, it was already time to fetch Minato from school, so she made sure to stop by there first. Mama! The little boy exclaimed when he spotted his mother. He jumped into her arms, and she swung him around as he laughed heartily. They walked home hand in hand, and Ino bought him a chocolate crepe, insisting it was in place of the cake she had promised him earlier. He accepted it without argument. Ino felt content, and knew that this is what she wanted her life to be like. Of course, back home she would also be a kunoichi, but she wanted to marry a man like Naruto, have children and spoil them. She wanted to laugh and cry with them, and just enjoy the peaceful moments of life. Ino's feeling of contentment evaporated into thin air when she noticed that the front door to the house was open. Minato had let go of her hand and skipped to the house, but she quickly pulled him back, her senses alert. Mama? Minato asked, curious when he realized his mother looked angry. Shush! She ordered and he obeyed. Ino debated whether she should investigate or flee to ensure Minato's safety. As she debated the options in her head, a figure had come to stand in the doorway and Minato was the first to spot him. Kurama! The little boy exclaimed, a broad smile on his face. The fox grinned in return, and Minato struggled from his mother's grip. She gasped when he slipped away, and was horrified when the boy jumped into the strange, animal-like man's arms. Kurama. Where had she heard that name before? Once Minato had squeezed the life out of Kurama, the fox put the little boy down, and his vermilion gaze shifted to the blonde woman. He scrutinized her. She didn't look any different, but her chakra was erratic and nowhere near what he had felt from her before. Her emotions were also erratic, fear and anger being the most dominant of them all. Calm yourself, woman, Kurama ordered. I mean no harm to you. Ino scoffed and crossed her arms. Who are you? Kurama was not surprised that she did not know, so he answered her calmly. I am Kurama, although you probably know me as the Kyuubi. Ino blinked, and then the shock settled in. She stared at the man before her, trying to come to terms with the fact that the man, and boy was he a man, was actually a fox, a giant fox with 9 tails, a wild temper and a habit of destroying things. Can Kurama play with me? Minato asked, completely oblivious to his mother's reaction towards the fox. Not now, kid, Kurama replied as he looked down at the little boy. I have to talk to your mom. We can play later. Go do your homework. Minato pouted, but did as he was told and disappeared into the house. Kurama turned his attention back to Ino. Karen is inside. She has minor injuries and has been drugged. I can't take her to the hospital because it might alert the High Council, so please check her over. Ino nodded, dumbfounded. She followed the fox inside to help her friend. While Ino treated Karen's wounds, which were really just scratches and some skin irritation from the handcuffs, Kurama explained what had happened. Hyuga Astra had kidnapped Karen, the reason still unknown, and Suigetsu and Sasuke should have her in custody by now. He also told Ino of the drug, who as a botanist, immediately recognized it. That herb was developed in Sunagaku during the Second Shinobi War and the Cage deemed it too dangerous for use, so the seedlings were destroyed. How on earth did she get her hands on it? Ino demanded. Kurama shrugged. Karen had been quiet during the whole exchange, but Ino could tell something was bothering her. Are you okay? Ino asked, but she kicked herself the minute the words left her mouth. Of course the woman was not okay. She had been kidnapped and kept prisoner. Ino shook her head. I'm sorry, that was a stupid question. Karen smiled weakly. It's alright, but I'd like to see Naruto as soon as possible. I need to tell him what I learned while captured. Kurama nodded. Yes, that is important, but it would be unwise for you to travel unwell. I'm fine, Karen hissed. We need to go now. Astra knows how to manipulate minds. And she is not working alone, so even if she is captured, her accomplice is still out there. Kurama did not look at all surprised at the revelation that Astra had an accomplice. He folded his hands together and looked Karen dead in the eyes. Is her accomplice Shimura Ayaka by any chance? Yes, Karen replied, surprised that he already knew. They have some sort of agreement. Astra brainwashes the High Council, while Ayaka provides Astra with a fake identification, backstory and protection from the law. Why? Kurama asked. Karen sighed. I don't fully understand it, and I don't want to repeat myself, so take me to Naruto. Very well, Kurama sighed. He moved to help Karen stand, but she pushed his help away and turned to Ino. You must come, Ino, Karen said. Me? Why? Ino asked, surprised. Because Hyuga Astra wants you. After making sure Minato was safe under the care of Hinata, Ino, Kurama and Karen made their way to the Hokage's office. Karen immediately stated that Naruto wasn't in his office, and his chakra was in the basement of the building, along with Sasuke, Suigetsu and what Karen now recognized as Astra's chakra. So they were successful, Kurama stated, more to himself than anybody else. They slowly made their way down to the basement, Ino's heartbeat getting more erratic with every step. She was anxious and also very, very confused. Why did Astra want her? What was the problem? Is this why Astra had treated her so badly? The basement was dark, the only light came from oil lamps that were mounted to the walls. Astra was tied to a chair, her normally neat and tidy dark hair was a wild mess around her head. Naruto stood before her, his arms crossed and his expression grim. He looked dangerous, and if she hadn't felt so confused and lost, Ino would have admired the regality that surrounded him. Sasuke and Suigetsu stood to Naruto's right, both sporting a few bruises and scratches, but overall they looked okay, which was a relief. To Naruto's left stood a stranger, a man Ino did not recognize, and if it wasn't for his medic uniform, she would not have known he worked for Konoha Hospital. How did you capture her? Kurama broke the silence. The four men turned to face the newcomers and Naruto looked surprised to see Ino with them. She smiled nervously at him, and he smiled reassuringly back, conveying the message that no harm would come to her if he was in the room, and it made her feel safe. It was surprisingly easy, Suigetsu commented. She's a complete nutcase. My little explosion got her attention, and while she tried to put up a fight, she was so far lost in some sort of crazy fit that she could barely lift a blade. The medic cleared his throat, turning all attention to him. She is not a nutcase, he stated with a commanding tone. She is a victim of several mental disorders, at least that is my hypothesis. I can't diagnose her without proper tests. While the others looked at him with blank faces, Ino understood what he was and why was present. He obviously worked in the psychiatric ward, and would have been called when Naruto determined Astra was not sound of mind. At this revelation, Ino turned her attention to the woman tied to the chair, looking for any sign of madness, for it was never there before. But, indeed, something had snapped in Astra. Her hair had become a wild mane, her eyes wild with a darkness that hadn't been there before. Gone was her calm, mysterious and moody disposition, and in its place sat a monster, a beast that bared its teeth once Ino met her gaze. Astra shrieked and struggled against the ropes that bound her to the chair, her voice echoing through the basement. It sent a shiver down Ino's spine and genuinely made her wonder what it was that could make such an aloof woman suddenly become so wild with maddening passion. What happened to her? Ino breathed, her heart beating wildly against her ribcage. She was perfectly normal the last time I saw her. We do not know, Naruto admitted. Nobu here believes she has struggled with her mental health for a while, but was able to gain some sense of control over her life, but something must have made her snap. The medic nodded. The Hokage is correct. But, once again, I cannot say for certain until I have conducted tests. Lord Hokage, I implore you, delay your interrogation. She is unsound of mind, and by law that means she should be treated first. Naruto sighed and rubbed his temples. Yes, I know. But she keeps saying my wife's name and I want to know why. Ino was the woman who raised her, Karen interrupted. All eyes turned to her. What? Ino asked, not expecting that answer. Karen sighed. Astra is from another dimension, separate from this one and yours, Ino. Suigetsu looked confused, but he decided not to interrupt to ask what his teammate meant by different dimension. He was certain if he listened he would come to understand. Karen continued her story. I saw some snippets of her life before she came here through her use of mind manipulation. It was horrible. Her dimension is buried in war and the Hokage is selected through a bloody battle to the death. Yamanaka Ino was a tyrant who challenged the previous Hokage, Astra's father, and won. Silence followed, and as the information settled, realization struck Sasuke, Suigetsu and Kurama. The painting in Astra's bedroom, her father, their gazes shifted to Naruto. Naruto noticed and frowned. What? He asked. You're her father, Naruto, Kurama stated. There's a painting in her bedroom, of her as an infant with Hinata, who is obviously her mother, and you. Naruto blinked, and then his gaze shifted to Astra, who was still struggling to free herself from her bonds. She is my daughter. Naruto echoed. Kurama nodded. Naruto's frown deepened. Okay. So she's my daughter from another dimension. I still don't understand. Why is she here? And what does she want with Ino, who is obviously not the tyrant from her dimension? I'm not entirely certain, Karen admitted. I only overheard her talking with Ayaka once, but Astra came here with the 5 dimensions to heaven. Remember that time Ino, our Ino I mean, had attempted to use it and another consciousness bled through into hers? Naruto nodded. He would never forget the time he feared for his wife's life. That consciousness was Astra, Karen pointed out. Astra had found a way to reverse the technique as she sifted through Ino's memories, which inevitably saved Ino's life, but it also meant Astra knew everything about the 5 dimensions to heaven, and in her anger and despair, she decided to complete the technique and escape her horrible life. But, Suigetsu interrupted. That's good, isn't it? She just wanted to escape. I would have done the same thing. Karen nodded. I know. Apparently, despite the fact that Astra had been able to separate herself from Ino's consciousness, a link remained between them. When Astra activated the technique, Ino was pulled into it, and in her attempt to try and reverse it, it backfired, and that is how we ended up with younger Ino here. A strange sensation washed over Ino as the explanation for why she had ended up in this dimension finally came to the surface. Naruto also seemed relieved, but he only visibly relaxed for a second before being on alert again. He moved closer to Ino and wrapped his arm around her shoulder, giving it a comforting squeeze. Now that they knew how she got here properly, they could work out how to get her back. Not all had been explained yet, but it was a start. Now they just needed to hear Astra's side of the story, to find out why she had lied to them all, why she had tampered with their memories of her, for they all thought she was a villager that had been around for decades. Now they could determine why she had brainwashed the High Council for Shimura Ayaka, and what exactly she wanted with Ino. Things were finally looking brighter. And then Astra shrieked violently, her chair rattling as she struggled. Her fiery gaze settled on Ino and she hissed like a poisonous snake. And then, just like that, she calmed and tears started flowing down her pale cheeks. Why? She croaked, her voice hoarse. Why did you say that, Ino? Uzumaki Hoshiko's only memory of her mother was of a cloudless night, the stars shining bright. Mother and daughter had settled in the damp grass, Hinata's warm motherly arms had held her steadily, and she had hummed an old lullaby long forgotten by the people of the Fire Country. Hinata, that night, had promised Hoshiko that soon her father would end the war. Soon there would finally be peace, and Hoshiko would be able to live her life to the fullest. It seemed like a dream so far out of reach, but she found herself clinging to it, desiring it. She wanted this peace that she had only seen in books. She wanted to see this ideal world her parents so vigorously fought for. After her mother's death, Hoshiko lost grasp of the dream. Her father had secluded himself from the world and shut himself in his office. She rarely saw him, and when she did, he smelled of stale ramen noodles and beer. An anxiety had settled within Hoshiko and she became isolated from the other children. They didn't like her. She was weird. Sometimes, when exposed to certain events, she breathed abnormally, and this scared the other children, for they did not understand that she had no control at times over her disorder. Her therapist constantly reminded her that the only way she would gain control is if she believed in herself again. But how could she believe in herself if she didn't even believe in the world? Her life was bleak. She had no friends, and school was spent in solitude, usually in a dark corner where she lost herself in her books. Books were her only friends, her solace. And it was at the age of 10 that the bane of her existence had noticed this. That is quite a thick book you got there. A voice, feminine, but filled a certain tone of danger, stated. Hoshiko looked up into a pair of eyes so blue, it would put even her father's to shame. So, Hoshiko had asked defiantly, so what if the book was thick? The woman smiled. At the time, Hoshiko had been too young to understand that the smile wasn't genuine, so she had returned the smile, thinking the woman approved of her endeavor to read a volume so beyond her age. She did not see the woman again for several years, until she had challenged her father to a duel to the death. Strangely, Naruto had accepted without argument, despite his advisor's word against it. And so her father had met his fate, at the hands of the woman Hoshiko only learned later had been his first lover. Yamanaka Ino was crowned Hokage, and by some sick twisted mind game, the woman had had the nerve to adopt Hoshiko, effectively pulling her away from the Hyuga family's grasp, and so Hanabi's help and little care vanished into thin air. Hoshiko's anxiety worsened the years that followed. And that was not all. She started hearing voices, just little whispers, whom she had convinced herself belonged to her mother. Her mother was angry. Her mother wanted her to kill Ino, that's what the voices said. And so Hoshiko waited for the moment she would exact her revenge. She endured Ino's abuse, while secretly training, just like her father's relative, Karen, had done. Finally, the day of her revenge had come. It was no secret that Ino's health had deteriorated as the years passed. Her strength was also slipping away, and yet nobody still had the nerve to challenge the Hokage. Most of Ino's rule had been that of tyranny, but there had been moments, acts that she had instilled that made the people fall at her feet and worse them. But Hoshiko was no fool, and she was not going to fall for such petty tricks. She challenged the woman to a duel to the death. She knew Ino would laugh in her face. She knew the woman would tell her, "Go home, little girl." Instead, she was greeted with a tired acceptance. And as Hoshiko drove her blade through Ino's chest, a mere 10 minutes into battle, Ino smiled. Hoshiko was already at the age of 20 by this time, and unlike the time when she was a child, she knew this smile was genuine. It was a smile of genuine sadness, filled with such despair, that Hoshiko could not believe it came from Yamanaka Ino's face. And then, with a single tear slipping from her cheek, Ino embraced her and whispered, "Forgive me, my little songbird." Those 5 words marked the end of Hoshiko's sanity. For nothing made sense anymore. Her mother's whispers had faded and was replaced with Ino's whispers instead. Wherever Hoshiko went, Ino followed. But this Ino wasn't cruel, and she never addressed Hoshiko by name. No, this Ino had friends, a Kagaya and a Minato. Children, with hair as blonde as their mother's, and eyes as blue as their father's, her father's blue eyes. The 4 of them lived together in a large mansion, shared meals together, and lived in a world of peace. Peace, the dream she had shared with her mother and never achieved. And as she watched them, she wanted it. She wanted a family, she wanted peace. The Ino in her head also whispered of darker things, of dimension traveling and expanding the power over invading other minds. Hoshiko had studied the unusual all her life, so she listened and she memorized every word, every sentence. She realized Ino was getting ill, and while she hated the woman, a part of her felt pity for this angelic version of the bane of her existence. So she studied and found the tiger seal that Ino was missing and inserted it into the equation. Ino's whispers vanished from her mind, and Hoshiko once again was alone, this time in a cell. But she had a new goal in life now. She was going to find a new life for herself, she was going to rewrite her own person. And Uzumaki Ino's 5 dimensions to heaven was going to be her tool. But before she could settle in a universe with her mother and father and have her happily ever after, she had one more task to do. It was the first and the last time she visited Yamanaka Ino's grave, where she found a letter enclosed in a box, entitled to her. It only had a few words. "If you had been my daughter by blood, I never would have treated you the way I did." Her therapist's mantra echoed through her head as she reread the letter 10 times, but the control would not come. She ripped the paper to shreds and in her anger, activated the technique that would bring her freedom. She never expected to come face to face with the Ino that had loved her children so dearly. Ino had tried to reverse the technique, in fear of the consequences. However, the force of it backfired, and Ino was sent spiraling into the wild unknown, exchanging her body with another. Hoshiko ended up stranded in Uzumaki Ino's dimension, alone and with a bump to the head and the link she had to the blonde woman severed. She was found by a Shimura Ayaka, who took care of her. For a time, Hoshiko was calm, her previous madness forgotten. With Ayaka's assistance, she was given a home, a job and a history. But Ayaka had ulterior motives, and had threatened Hyuga Hinata's life if Hoshiko did not brainwash the High Council, and continued to control their actions. Hoshiko, who had missed her mother more than anything, did as she was told. For even if the woman in this dimension was not her mother, she was still Hinata. And for Hinata, she would do anything. The bump to her head had addled her memory somewhat, and all she could remember of Ino was that she was angry, and the woman had to pay. Ino had taken something from her, and she wanted it back. Months passed, and her memory slowly started to return, and with it the unexplainable anger. Hoshiko, now going by the name Astra, made her dislike for Ino, this time a much younger Ino stuck in the body of an older one, quite clear. And as the anger festered, the voices returned and whispered little notions into her ear. Why should Ino always get her happy ending? Ino may have asked for forgiveness, but she didn't mean it. Kill her. The voices swept over Astra and had completely cut her from reality. She was so lost in the never-ending darkness that she didn't even realize the noise she had heard in the garden would be the downfall of her freedom. The strike to the back of her head effectively knocked her unconscious, and when she came to, she was met by the blank stares of her capturers, her father amongst them. But his presence was not the one that sent her into a wild fit of rage. Ino. Why was it always Ino? Why couldn't the woman leave her alone? Why? She croaked, her voice hoarse. Why did you say that, Ino? It was at that moment that Uzumaki Hoshiko, who had almost forgotten what her name sounded like on her own lips, realized that what Ino had taken from her was her childhood. Ino had killed her father, adopted her for some unknown reason and abused her. Ino hadn't taken anything physical, and the damage was done. Ino would not be able to give what she had taken back. Why did you ask for my forgiveness? Hoshiko sobbed as she struggled against the ropes that bound her to the chair. Why did you look at me like you loved me, when I drove a sword through your heart? She did not receive a response, and rather it seemed like the group was ignoring her. The medic, a man she did not recognize, turned to her father. Lord Hokage, please, the medic begged. Naruto nodded, and motioned for Kurama to untie the ropes that bound Hoshiko to the chair. He did so, and lifted her into his arms with ease. He turned to the medic. Where are we taking her? Kurama asked. The medic gave directions to the fox, and then two of them vanished in puffs of smoke, leaving the rest behind. Sasuke sighed. And now we still don't know what it was that she wanted. We wouldn't have gotten anything out of her, Naruto responded. Let the medic take care of her. Let us worry about the High Council. Speaking of, what are you planning to do regarding Shimura? Karen asked. Sasuke glanced at his wife, worry evident on his features, but she just smiled at him. He did not return the smile, but he took her hand in his and squeezed tightly. He was relieved that she was safe and unharmed. Are you planning to arrest Shimura? Sasuke asked. Because if you are, I'd like the honor of doing it. Naruto shook his head, which led to the others in the room gaping at him in shock. She's a criminal, Karen argued. She is guilty of treason, you cannot just let her go. Do not make the same mistakes the third made with Danzo. Naruto seemed offended at the comment, because he glared coldly at Karen. She cowered under his intense gaze and shifted her own gaze to her feet. You misunderstand, Karen, Ino interrupted. We do not have proper evidence to arrest her, only your word. Naruto plans to confront her and put her in a situation where she will be forced to admit her crimes. All eyes turned to Ino in surprise. Even Naruto looked shocked that she had already figured out what he was planning. She smiled and shrugged. She knew him, and she knew him well. She also knew that the way he would handle Shimura's case would also be different from what Sasuke and Karen wants. That is not a bad idea, Sasuke admitted as he tapped his chin. How do you plan to do it? I'm calling a high council meeting, Naruto replied. The shit's going to hit the fan, figuratively speaking. Sasuke nodded, but Karen still seemed displeased. And, once she's admitted to being guilty, she demanded. She will have a trial, Naruto said. Sasuke and Karen's expressions both seemed to sour at this admittance. Suigetsu glanced at them nervously, feeling very out of place in this conversation. Don't you think she's past the stage of trial? Sasuke asked. Karen nodded in agreement. Naruto, however, tensed, and Ino could see he was not amused by being challenged by two people he trusted. She stepped closer to him, took his curled fist in her hand and forced it to uncurl by lacing her fingers with his. This seemed to calm him somewhat, and he squeezed her hand. If you are hinting that she should be executed on the spot, Naruto began, then you two have clearly been living under a rock since I have become Hokage. Sasuke and Karen looked taken aback by this, and Karen was ready to retort, but Naruto cut her off. Every human being, no matter what crimes they have committed, has a right to be given a second chance. And that means a fair and just trial, overseen by myself and a tribunal, Naruto stated, his voice flat and cold. You know I do not commend the death penalty, and that if I can avoid it, I do. Karen, again, wanted to speak, but Naruto's glare silenced her. I've never considered execution as the first option when it came to my enemies, Naruto continued. I always tried to negotiate, to understand why they are doing what they are doing. If you still can't accept that this is who I am, then what have you been doing all these years of knowing me? Sasuke looked embarrassed as Naruto stated this, for as one of his oldest friends, he should have known all of this already. And he did, but his anger over Karen being taken has blinded him, and in his rage he had spoken without thinking. Forgive me, Naruto, Sasuke muttered. But we can't let her go unpunished. I never said she would not be punished, Naruto stated. I simply said, she would not be executed without trial. The tribunal will decide her punishment. Not to insult you or anything, Karen interrupted, but all your possible tribunal candidates are currently under a mind control technique that makes them loyal to the very criminal they are supposed to charge. I've already considered that, Naruto responded. And I already know which individuals I am going to ask to sit on the tribunal. In fact, I'm going to separate the High Council from the tribunal. Their power cannot overlap, it is unbalanced. You can do that? Suigetsu asked, surprised. Naruto nodded. Yes, as long as the daimyo approves it. Do you know what that means? Suigetsu asked, suddenly excited. Sasuke and Karen stared at their friend and shook their heads. Ino was also confused, but Naruto seemed to know what Suigetsu was thinking, because he was smiling. No, please do enlighten us, Suigetsu, Karen grumbled. It was the tribunal that found Jugo unstable and dangerous and thus charged him with imprisonment. If a new tribunal is elected, we could request a retrial and Jugo could be freed. If the tribunal members don't make the same decision, Sasuke muttered. Jugo's power is hard to control and there's many that fear it. Ino, not fully understanding the extent of Jugo's powers, decided to step in. What are his powers, exactly? I don't actually know what makes him so unstable. Is there nobody that can teach him to control it? Sasuke was about to answer, when a strange expression danced over his face. He blinked rapidly, and then his eyes widened as his gaze shifted to Naruto. Naruto lifted an eyebrow in curiosity at the strange gaze his friend was giving him. What? He asked. Oi, Bastard, stop looking at me like that. Sasuke. Karen tried snapping her husband from his shocked stupor, but she was unsuccessful. Even Suigetsu tried to snap him out of it by waving his hand in front of the Uchiha's face. Finally, Sasuke snapped out of it, and started laughing. His friends and wife watched him with worried expressions as his laughter grew louder, to the point where he was laughing so wildly, he was bending over. What's going on? Naruto demanded, completely confused. Sasuke's laughter slowly died down, and he wiped some tears away that had formed as a result. Oh, dope, we are the most unintelligent and idiotic ninja in history, Sasuke snorted. Oh, really? Naruto barked. Do enlighten me as to why. All these years the answer has been staring us in the face. Jugo needs to learn control. He can't do it the normal way, because then he would never have had the problem, but we all know someone who has the same abilities, and who never gives up on finding alternative ways to train and control power, Sasuke explained. His friends still weren't seeing it, so with a laugh Sasuke smacked Naruto on the shoulder. You, Lord Hokage, are a sage. Several seconds of quiet passed, and then Naruto gaped. Oh my god. Yes. Sasuke nodded. Oh my god, why did I not think of that? Naruto exclaimed. Ino looked confused, while Karen and Suigetsu were equally as shocked as the Hokage. In his excitement, Naruto turned to Ino and pulled her into an embrace. He spun her around, making her laugh, but she was still very confused. Oh, Uzumaki Ino, I could kiss you. He exclaimed. His smile, however, faded when he realized the slip of his tongue. Ino smiled sadly at him as he stopped spinning her, but his hands remained firmly placed on her s. I'm sorry, he whispered. She shook her head and cupped his cheeks. No need to apologize, she whispered back. So, mind letting me on your epiphany? Naruto's smile returned. Jugo's family is known for having a natural ability to absorb natural energy. Controlling it, however, is very difficult, and since he is continuously absorbing it, he can't keep it under check. Hence why he is unstable and can have some episodes. Ah, Ino hummed. And you being a sage or whatever fixes this, how? Naruto was full on grinning now. Because a sage is a master at gathering and controlling natural energy. Ino blinked as the information settled. Oh, she exclaimed, equally as excited now. You can teach him to control it. Or try and find a way to. Yes, Naruto nodded. And I think Sasuke and I would have completely kept forgetting this skill of mine unless you mentioned teaching him control. You, Ino, are a genius. Ino felt her heart flutter when he leaned in and planted a kiss on her forehead. This is good news, Ino hummed. Shizuka wishes to visit him next week. Really? Sasuke? Suigetsu and Karen asked, flabbergasted. She wants to see him. And Kasumi? Ino nodded. Yes. And she will be so happy to hear this great news. And oh, was Shizuka of Nadeshiko overjoyed. When she had arrived at the gates of Konoha, Ino and Naruto were already waiting. Kasumi was a bright young girl, and very eager to meet her father. She was also curious, and continued to ask questions, some of them very random and misplaced. As they walked through the village streets, Ino explained how Jugo could have another trial, and if Naruto could prove to the tribunal that he could help find a way for Jugo to learn control, he could be freed. Shizuka had promptly halted in the middle of the street at the revelation and burst into tears. Kasumi, being the ever-loving daughter, tried to console her mother to the best of her ability, but Shizuka had simply told the girl that she was crying, happy tears, before embracing her. Ino watched the scene with a smile, while Naruto was trying to come to terms with the fact that emotionally controlled Shizuka was crying in the middle of his village's streets. When she finally calmed down after a cup of tea, Shizuka was ready to be reunited with her lover. The walk to his prison was slow and Ino could see the nerves settling as they got closer. Shizuka was especially on edge when they got inside and passed through the security, and Ino did not blame her. She hated the walls and seals too. Is this really okay? Shizuka asked just as they were to enter Jugo's cell. Of course, Naruto replied with a smile. Shizuka nodded and turned to open the door. Naruto's arm wrapped around Ino's waist and he pulled her against him. She looked up, surprised by his bold move. He grinned and whispered in her ear, "Let her go alone first." Ino nodded. The door creaked open, and Jugo, who had been reading, looked up, not having expected to have a visitor. When Shizuka walked through the door, his book clattered to the floor. Their embrace was probably the most beautiful sight Ino had ever seen. And she could not help but cry with them. Naruto had to fight the urge to cough as the daimyo exhaled a puff of smoke from his pipe. The two of them were seated in the secret meeting place located within the Hokage monument, having both agreed that the situation with the High Council had to be addressed immediately. They had just concluded discussing the options, and now Naruto was just waiting for the daimyo's approval. A stout man, the current daimyo was, in many ways, much like his mother. He was vain, loud and just as fond of squeezing cats. Naruto would never forget Tora, the poor little feline that always ran away from his owner. Tora, bless her soul, was no longer in this world, but Naruto highly doubted that Lady Shijimi never replaced her. Well, the daimyo finally hummed after several puffs of smoke filtered through the air. I must say, Naruto, I am once again reminded that electing you as Hokage remains the wisest choice I ever made. Naruto fought the urge to blush at the praise. I'm not that great. Nonsense, the daimyo waved him off. My mother is very fond of you, you know. Always talks about how you were one of the cute genin that saved her cat. I highly doubt you approved my nomination because your mother likes me, Naruto laughed. Indeed, the daimyo agreed with a smile. His face then became serious. I approve the changes. I think it would be wise to separate the lawmakers from the law enforcers. But, I will remain adamant that your word is the last word, yes. Understood. As for the 3 individuals you have nominated to become the tribunal members, the daimyo trailed off as he leaned forward to look at the profiles Naruto had presented him with. Interesting choices. Especially for the one you want to appoint as magister. I would have thought you would nominate Nara Shikamaru, or his father for the job. Or even your father-in-law. She's most suited to the position. Is she not retired? She is. But she's well educated when it comes to law. I dare say she knows the system better than I do. And since she's no longer an active kunoichi, she will always be in the village to attend to the tribunal. Sound reasoning. Very well, I approve those 2. Naruto bowed his head in thanks. Is there more you wish to discuss? The daimyo asked when he realized Naruto remained with his head bowed. I apologize, Naruto muttered. I realize the High Council was my idea, which you so faithfully supported and allowed me to create. And now look what has become of it. The daimyo laughed. Naruto, we are in a world where conflict and betrayal will never cease to exist. It stinks, I know, but shit like this happens. You are not the person who committed the crime. Do not blame yourself over someone else's selfish actions. Naruto looked up, astonished. The other daimyo would have sacked me by now. The daimyo pulled a face. Then they are fools. Naruto, our world needs compassionate people like you. Not men ruled by their arrogance and think themselves as gods. You are a great leader, who is loved by many. I dare say, Hokage is but a title when applied to you. Your name shines brighter than the hat you put on the day I appointed you. You're making me look like a hero again, Naruto muttered with a roll of his eyes. The daimyo snorted. And you're being a big sap. Now go home to that wife of yours, yes. With 37-year-old Ino. The fingers resting against her forehead were cool, despite the desert heat that surrounded them. Ino watched Gaara, fascinated, as he navigated through her mind. He seemed to know how to tread carefully, he hadn't even knocked her unconscious. Such skill to move through such an indelicate part of a human was rare. A part of Ino wondered if maybe he had Yamanaka blood. No, Gaara muttered. Just years and years of practice. You learn a lot from hearing's thoughts every day. Ino smiled. I can see that. You invented the 5 dimensions to heaven. Gaara asked. I did. Impressive. Although, I would include the tiger seal next time, to balance the powers. Ino blinked, surprised. Fascinated, she proceeded to sift through the mental notes she had made of the technique. Ino was excellent at remembering things, and everything she had written in her notebook regarding the technique was no different. And, indeed, when she came across the pattern of seals she had originally formulated for the technique, she noticed the tiger was missing. Which, just like Gaara had implied, creates a gap in the balance. No wonder the technique had backfired on her. When she had activated it, it was incomplete and thus could only work to half of its capacity. So she was only transferred halfway, and due to the inaccuracy of an incomplete technique, she basically had no aim for a transfer. That was how she ended up with another person's mind within her own. They must have collided and the technique couldn't separate them due to the imbalance. She had mulled months over what could have caused the technique to backfire and nearly kill her. And Gaara found the answer in seconds. Thank you, Ino whispered. If I revise the technique with what you just told me, I could probably reverse it. Don't thank me, Gaara replied. It was quite obvious, which is probably why you missed it. Shut up, Ino laughed. Gaara just smirked, but the smirk quickly vanished. What? Ino asked when she noticed his sudden serious expression. I've reached your tampered memories, Gaara stated. His brow puckered. But something is not right. Ino frowned. Well, don't leave me in the dark. They were not tampered with, rather, they are just blocked off. I can't get across the barrier. Ino blinked, then frowned again. It's a good thing they weren't tampered with, it means if we can break the barrier my memories should just return. Gaara nodded, but he still seemed perplexed. She felt him dig a bit deeper and winced at the sliver of pain in shot through her spine. Gaara pulled back. My apologies, he muttered. No, it's fine. Finally, Gaara seemed to give up and pulled away. Ino watched him, bewildered that he had broken the connection. He turned away from her. You are not honestly going to give up so quickly, are you? Ino asked, frustrated. I'm not the one that gave up, Gaara hissed. You are the one who gave up. Ino blanched. Excuse me. The barrier around your memories was not erected by some external source, Gaara pointed out. Nobody attacked you and fiddled in your head as we originally believed. What are you trying to say? Ino snapped. It was you. You are the one who sealed your own memories. Now shaking, Ino clenched her fists and looked down at her feet. It was impossible. Why would she block her own memories? The only possible conclusion for her choice to do so would mean the information the memories held were dangerous. Or, why would I seal my own memories? Gaara shrugged. No idea. Ino sagged to the ground. Either she was trying to protect something, or she was running away from something. With 16-year-old Ino, Naruto found Ino asleep at her desk. It was just past sunrise, and the fact that she was still dressed, with 3 used cups sitting beside her, made it very clear she had pulled an all-nighter. When he placed a blanket over her shoulders, he glanced her notebook open underneath her arms. He sighed. Looks like he was in charge of getting the kids to school this morning, again. Not that he minded, he loved taking care of his 2 angels. But, he was worried about his wife. The 5 dimensions to heaven was eating away at her. Morning, Kagaya mumbled from the doorway. Did mom fall asleep here again? Naruto turned to his daughter. Seems so. Go wake up Minato, would you? Kagaya pulled a face, but did as told without argument. Naruto, meanwhile, moved to the kitchen to put on the rice cooker. There should be some leftover fish and miso soup he could heat up too. Simple, easy breakfast. Morning, Papa, Minato chirped as he skipped into the room. Where's Mama? Asleep, so quieten down a bit, Naruto responded. Minato saluted in response. I, Captain. How do you have so much energy in the morning? Kagaya asked as she stomped into the kitchen. It's irritating. Naruto chuckled as he placed the soup on the stove and the fish in the microwave. They were halfway through breakfast when Ino joined them, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her short hair was a spiky mess and there were dark circles under her eyes. She sat down at the table without a word. Naruto handed her a bowl of rice, also without a word. Kagaya fetched her some soup. Mama, Minato exclaimed excitedly as he bounced in his chair. Can we have ice cream after school today? Sure, was the unenthusiastic response. A yawn escaped Ino's mouth. Naruto sighed again. Minato, finish your breakfast, so you can get ready for school. Kagaya, you'll help him, yes. Kagaya nodded, but her attention was more focused on her mother, who was sleepily munching on some rice. She seemed out of it today, more so than usual. Once Minato and Kagaya disappeared upstairs, and Naruto gathered the dishes and dumped them in the sink, he turned to his wife, who still sat at the dining table in a daze. He crossed his arms. When is this going to stop? Ino looked up, surprised. What? The all-nighters, Naruto snapped. Ino blinked. I thought we talked about this already. Something went wrong when I activated the 5 dimensions to heaven, and I want to fix it. Something went wrong. Naruto snorted. It nearly killed you. Ino rolled her eyes. And yet, here I still am. I thought I asked you to stop working on that technique and just scrap it as forbidden, Naruto hissed. Ino fidgeted and looked away from her husband's gaze. I can't give up now. I'm so close. Slam. Ino jumped at the noise from Naruto slamming his hands against the sink counter. She turned to him, not surprised to see his face red in anger. Damn it, Ino, he yelled. I know you want to prove something by completing this technique, but it is dangerous. Another human being's consciousness bled into yours. You nearly died. Think of the children. This time, anger flared up Ino as well. She stood up, the chair clattering on the ground. I am thinking about the children. But I can't just leave it now, not when I am so close to making a breakthrough. This can make Yamanaka history. She yelled back. She expected him to yell back again. This wasn't the first time they have had this argument. She knew his next words would be something along the lines of, as Hokage, his orders were absolute. And she would yell back that he was her husband first, not her Hokage. Then that would start a whole new argument. But this time, it was different. Instead of continuing the argument, Naruto's face drew blank. Ino quivered under his cold stare. Then, without a word, he stomped out of the house, the door slamming loudly behind him. He had never, in their several years together, looked at her like that. She sank to her knees, tears starting to flow down her cheeks, unaware that Naruto was still outside, watching her from the window, his own tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. Naruto gasped and jolted up, his heart beating dangerously in his chest. A dream. Closing his eyes and allowing the cool air of the bedroom to calm him, Naruto took a moment to inhale deeply. He had nearly forgotten about the problems he had before his wife swapped places with a younger version of herself. Naruto. Ino's voice shattered the silence. His eyes snapped open, and he turned to face the blonde now sitting up beside him. Her hair was a mess, very much like in the dream, but there was no dark circles and her eyes were much younger. To be expected, the Ino next to him now was not the one from his dreams. Just a dream, Naruto whispered. His hands clenched into fists. It was a dream, yes, but it was also very real. Ino noticed that Naruto was shaking slightly, so without a word she reached out and placed a comforting hand on his arm. For a few minutes, she allowed him to gather his wits in silence. Finally, she asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" Naruto wanted to shake his head at first. He was the type to bury his problems and put up a happy front at all times. But with Ino, those barriers never really stayed in place, not even with a younger alternate version of her. "We had an argument," Naruto whispered. "The morning of the day before I came home and found you in her place." Ino blinked. It was a strange thing to imagine, Naruto arguing with her older self. From what she's heard, witnessed and experienced herself, they seem to be the perfect couple. Arguing just doesn't seem to be part of their marriage, but that notion was, of course, unrealistic and silly. "And it bothers you because you are yet to resolve it?" Ino asked. Naruto sighed. "I suppose. I think what bothers me more is the way I walked out on her that morning. I saw the look on her face. She was terrified and deeply hurt." Ino scooted closer and wrapped her arms around Naruto's shoulders. It was a bold move, but he did not stop her and it felt natural. "I'm sure she has forgiven you." Naruto smiled weakly and patted one of Ino's arms. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" Ino asked. "Honestly," Naruto began, "I was so busy trying to get used to you and all the other problems, that it just got pushed to the side. But now I am stressed about the High Council, and I suppose everything is just piling up." Ino lay her head on Naruto's shoulder and closed her eyes. "You still have a few days. You will gather the tribunal members and be ready to face the council. I believe in you." Naruto smiled weakly as he gripped Ino's hand and laced their fingers. "Thank you. You're welcome." With 37-year-old Ino. Ino neatly scribbled the sequence of hand seals on the scroll Gaara had given to her, ensuring to include the tiger seal. Once she was done, she sat back and scrutinized her work. She delicately traced every seal with her index finger. Yes, it will work. With this, Ino had finally, after years, completed the 5 dimensions to heaven. She can finally go home. But as that thought settled, dread rose within her. With a frustrated sigh, she pushed away from the scroll, stood and moved to the window that overlooked Sunagaku. "What are you running away from?" Her own voice echoed through her head. She had asked the same question several years earlier, when she had found a runaway bride on the roof of the very temple she was supposed to tie the knot in. Karen did always have a flair for the dramatics. But Ino doubted her reason for running away was similar to Karen's reasons. For starters, this was not her wedding day, and she wasn't marrying the grump that is known as Uchiha Sasuke. And this time, she was dealing with the person she knew best, herself. She had barely even known Karen all those years ago. But that one conversation on the roof had revealed to Ino just how similar she was to Karen. They both wanted to prove themselves. And so, once she had convinced the redhead to walk down the aisle, a friends had unconsciously formed between them. And yet, she still could not fathom what it was that made her seal her own memories. And she did not understand her hesitation to release the seal and have a look. Closing her eyes, Ino placed her hand on her flat belly, where she could sense the small and weak chakra of the baby she had placed in such a dangerous position. How could she hesitate in such a situation? She had to think of her unborn child. So many uncertainties. Ino did, however, know one thing for certain. She was a coward. And she was ashamed to admit it. With 16-year-old Ino convincing Nara Shikaku and Yamanaka Inoichi to become tribunal members had not taken much. Naruto had barely stepped foot in his father-in-law's house when the blonde man had simply stated that he would do his duty for the village, even if he was an old man who should long be retired. Shikaku had said something similar, after grumbling about how troublesome it was. Only one person left. Naruto stared at the wooden door before him, the nerves bubbling in his gut. Knock. He berated himself. But as he lifted his arm to do so, his nerves got the better of him, and his limb dropped back to his side. He sighed and looked down at his feet that barely stuck out from under his robes. He had never visited this house before. The family had only moved after the war, and in his shame and regret, he had never dared disturb them. Oh, a female voice exclaimed suddenly. Naruto turned around, coming face to face with a heart-shaped face, honey hair and emerald eyes. The woman squeaked again when they made eye contact and bowed deeply. Lord Hokage. Naruto sighed and scratched the back of his head. I thought I told you ages ago to just call me Naruto, Renge. Renge straightened, but her posture remained stiff. I don't think it is appropriate. Naruto shook his head. Arguing with her was useless. She was stubborn, just like her sister had been. Is your mother home? Naruto asked. She should be, Renge replied. Is she not answering the door? Naruto laughed nervously. Actually, I haven't had the courage to knock. Renge raised an eyebrow, then with a shake of her head, she pushed past Naruto and unlocked the door. Come in, I'll go find her. Thanks, Naruto mumbled as he stepped inside and pulled off his shoes. Renge disappeared into a room at the end of the hallway, leaving Naruto alone in the strange house that smelled like freesia, apples and cinnamon. It was a scent he had not encountered in years and made his heart clench. A figure appeared in the doorway which Renge had disappeared through. A woman with graying blonde hair, green eyes and wearing a white kippah stared at him, her eyes wide. Well, this is certainly a surprise, she stated. Naruto bowed. It's been a long time, Mrs. Haruno. The tea stood forgotten on the table, and the clock on the wall ticked slowly. It was the only noise in the room except for its three occupants, breathing. Haruno Mebuki was the first to break the silence. I am not certain what to say. Naruto did not dare look up from where his gaze was focused on his lap. So many years, and he still could not look the woman in the eye. This is an opportunity, mother, Haruno Renge interrupted. At 30, Renge was a woman of elegant beauty, a trait common to all three Haruno women Naruto knew. However, unlike her sister, Renge was a rigid individual and had no interest in the way of a ninja. Her interest and expertise lay with the law, a trait she shared with her mother. Indeed, Mebuki hummed. She turned to face Naruto, her brows knitted together. However, I cannot help but wonder. Naruto, what brought this on? Naruto looked up, confused. Pardon, this request, Mebuki explained. Why have you come to me? Is this your attempt to seek forgiveness? What? Naruto asked, flabbergasted. No, of course not. Mebuki did not seem convinced. Are you certain? You know, I never once blamed you or Kakashi for what happened to Sakura. I know, Naruto muttered. How is Kakashi, by the way? Mebuki asked before she took a sip of her tea. Still not wearing his mask, Naruto replied. Mebuki smiled weakly. That man, he will never forgive himself, will he? Naruto shook his head. Kakashi was going to the grave, face exposed and with his guilt deeply etched into his heart. And what of Sasuke? Mebuki asked. He is well, Naruto stated. Karen is expecting their fourth child. Already? Renge asked, amused. Can't Sasuke keep it in his pants? What did Sakura see in that idiot? Naruto shrugged. Trust me, I've been asking myself the same question for years. The mood in the room seemed to lighten a bit, which was a relief to Naruto. The tension was starting to get to him. He had never been the type to get nervous in the presence of Sakura's family, but having cut himself off from them for so long, things had gotten somewhat awkward. The door slamming open interrupted the conversation. A young brunette stomped into the room, her posture agitated. I hate boys. The girl exclaimed before throwing her bag on the floor and sagging into one of the dining chairs. Welcome home, Shiragiku, Mebuki greeted. Greet the Hokage properly, would you? Hanajima Shiragiku looked her maternal grandmother in the eye, grumbled, and then turned to Naruto. Hi, she muttered. Hello, Naruto returned the greeting. And now your mother, Mebuki continued calmly. Shiragiku turned to Renge. Mom. Renge just shook her head. Naruto took the return of thick tension to the room as his cue to leave. He could feel a family feud brewing and he had no intention of witnessing it. So without hesitation, he stood and excused himself. I'll see you out, Renge offered. Naruto wanted to argue, but she gave him that typical Haruno look, the very one that had scared him as a kid whenever it was thrown his way by Sakura, so he kept his mouth shut and let the younger woman walk him out. Just before Naruto moved to close the door to the hallway, Mebuki called his name. He stopped, but did not turn around. I meant what I said, Mebuki said. I do not blame you. As for your request, I will do it. But I expect a retirement package included with my pay. Naruto nodded. Thank you. Ino was washing the dishes when she heard the front door open and close. It was too early for the children to be home, so that left only one person who had access to the house. With a smile, Ino quickly finished the plate she was washing. She turned, drying her hands, just as Naruto walked into the kitchen. How did it go? Ino asked. All three agreed, Naruto replied. Even Mebuki. You doubted her? Ino asked, confused. Back in my dimension, she's not the type to run away from something if she feels it is important, regardless of her personal feelings. I know, Naruto mumbled. But your Mebuki has not lost her oldest daughter. Ino blinked. Oldest. Naruto quirked an eyebrow. Yes. Sakura has a little sister named Renge. Ino gaped. She most definitely does not have one in my dimension. Renge, you say. What is she like? Naruto chuckled and sat down at the dining table. Ino moved to turn on the kettle. They are 7 years apart, which means Renge is now 30. I suppose Renge is in some ways Sakura's opposite, while in others, they are exactly alike. How so? Naruto hummed. I don't know. Renge has always been the type to keep to herself. She observes and rarely gets involved unless an injustice has occurred. She's kind of like Sasuke in that regard. So, unlike Sakura, she doesn't jump into situations without analyzing every aspect. Yeah, but not even Sakura ever jumped into anything without at least analyzing some of the situation. The one who went in blindly was always me. Ino laughed. I don't know, you don't give yourself enough credit. You wouldn't have come this far if you didn't notice things others don't. Naruto shrugged. I guess. The kettle whistled. Ino quickly removed it from the stove and proceeded to pour the water into 2 cups. Naruto watched her silently, his gaze affectionate. Ino handed Naruto his cup. So, I've been meaning to ask this for a long time, but what exactly happened to Sakura? Naruto sighed. Granny Tsunade and the other 4 Kage were severely injured in the war, so for a short period command fell to Kakashi and myself as Katsuyu healed them. The enemy had split in order to distract us and one of their platoons were heading for a populated area. Naruto trailed off for a few seconds, then inhaled to continue. We couldn't allow civilians to die in our battle, so Kakashi and I agreed to send a platoon of skilled ninja and a few medics after the enemy. Kakashi and Sakura went with them. Ino wasn't sure where this was going, but she knew it wasn't going to be pretty. She reached out to Naruto and laced their fingers. He smiled weakly at her. It was an explosion. Kakashi was at the center of it, but Sakura pushed him out of the way and got caught in the blast instead. We never found a body, just some red fabric from her shirt. We knew the chances of finding any remains were slim, the explosion was very powerful. Ino squeezed her eyes tightly to fight back tears. Kakashi blames himself. They were very close, and in Kakashi's eyes her sacrifice should have been his own. It's why he doesn't wear his mask anymore, he wants the world to see his guilt and pain. He wants to appear human, rather than a ninja who shows no emotion. It seems all our friends died heroes, Ino whispered. Naruto nodded. Yeah, they did. Hyuga Hinata was nervous as she approached Konoha Hospital. Her morning had been a whirlwind. She had woken up late, the pregnancy really starting to get to her. She had gotten ready in a rush and practically ran to the meeting that was to take place. When she had arrived, it had already started with her father leading. But what had surprised her was Naruto's presence, and the fact that the elders were allowing him to stay. By the end of their discussion, Naruto seemed to be on the edge of his seat. Her father had then called him up. "I'm going to be frank," he began, his voice stern. "I have reason to believe that a number of individuals in the village have committed treason." Whispers broke out in the room, some even gasped. Naruto cleared his throat. "I'm afraid that I have evidence that Hyuga Moritsugu is one of these individuals." More whispers and gasps. Hiyashi stood, which silenced everyone in the room. "Moritsugu is our elected member for the High Council," Hiyashi said. "Does this mean others in the council?" Naruto cut him off. "Yes." Hiyashi looked down at the ground, disappointment obvious on his face. Then, he slowly sank to the ground and bowed lowly. The whispers began again. "Lord Hokage, as one of the people who nominated him for the position, I humbly." Naruto cut him off again. "Please, stop, Hiyashi. It is not your fault. Nor is it Moritsugu's fault." Hiyashi looked up, surprised. "What? I do not understand. Please elaborate, Naruto," Hinata requested. She already knew, but the rest of the clan did not. "We have reason to believe the council is being manipulated. There is a high possibility Moritsugu is not aware of what he has been doing," Naruto explained. "Mind manipulation," one of the elders muttered. Naruto nodded solemnly. Hinata tried to gauge the reactions of the elders, but they all seemed pretty stone-faced. She then turned back to Naruto. "What is your plan?" Naruto sighed. "I am hoping to expose the source. Make the council see what they have done. But for that, the manipulation must be stopped." "And how do we do that?" Hinata questioned further. This is where Naruto's expression turned serious. "I will only reveal it if you promise me something." The elders seemed perplexed at this. "Are you really in a position to bargain like this?" one asked. Naruto scoffed. "Says the very elders who sent the corpse of one of their own to Kumogakure." That had been a low blow. Hiyashi, especially, flinched. Hinata, although annoyed that Naruto mentioned something they had all wanted long buried, understood why he had said it. Even though the memory of Hizashi did nothing but bring forth memories of Neji. That was painful to bear. "Very well," Hiyashi sighed. "What do you require of us?" Naruto shuffled, then stood straight. "I am sick and tired of the people who are appointed as advisors acting as if they are the ones in charge. That includes all of you, and not just the High Council." "How dare you?" One elder started to yell, but Hiyashi raised his arm to silence him. "Please continue, Lord Hokage," Hiyashi insisted. Naruto nodded in thanks. "Like I said, I am done with this power play. Hinata is your head of house. She is your leader. And she decides what is best for this clan. If that means stepping down, moving to Sunagakure to be with her husband, and reinstating Masahiro as heir, then that shall be done." The elders looked like they wanted to object, but Hiyashi simply shook his head. Meanwhile, Hinata was staring wide-eyed at her friend. "I know that interfering with clan politics has always been outside of the Hokage's jurisdiction, but I say pooh to that. How is Hinata supposed to lead your clan properly, if she is miserable?" The elders all looked dejected. A clan prospers when its members are happy and content. Alienating Masahiro, separating Gaara and Hinata, will do nothing but bring hatred, anger and discontentment to your clan. And who knows, in a few years, your wonderful Hyuga clan may fall apart. Hinata, fighting back tears, stood. But before she could say anything, Hiyashi stepped forward and bowed again. "Thank you, Naruto. I will see my grandson reinstated." A few elders nodded, while the others looked angry. But none of them dared to say anything. So, Hiyashi changed the subject after he straightened. What do you require of us to stop the manipulation? Naruto sagged, probably in relief. Oh, I just need Hinata to visit the hospital. And here she was. The receptionist had been expecting her, and had immediately led her to the psychiatric ward. After introducing her to one of the staff there, the receptionist left and Hinata followed the nurse down the sterile hallway to a room near the end. She's a bit unstable, the nurse stated. The doctor has had little success in getting anything out of her. But he has high hopes. Hinata simply nodded. She did not know what else to say. The nurse smiled weakly, then slid the door open. The room was bare. Nothing but a bed. The other furniture must have been removed to prevent any accidents. A desperate, mentally ill Kunoichi could very easily fashion a weapon out of a chair. Said Kunoichi was curled on the floor, in the corner of the room, far from the small window which let in a little sun. You have a visitor, dear, the nurse said. Two eyes peeked from behind folded arms. Hey, come say hello, the nurse urged. The eyes moved from the nurse to Hinata, and widened. Why must it be me? Hinata had asked Naruto after the meeting with her clan elders adjourned. You are far better at convincing people. She doesn't appreciate me as much, I think. Hinata raised an eyebrow. I do not understand. Naruto shuffled nervously, and pulled a small piece of glossy paper from his pocket. He shoved it in Hinata's hands. She looked at it, confused. It was a photograph of them, together, with a baby. Hinata's eyes widened. Is this? She is from another dimension. Like Ino. She's ours. Hinata shook the memory from her head and smiled tensely. Hello, Hoshiko. With 37-year-old Ino. What are you doing here? Was the first thing that came out of Temari's mouth when Gaara and Ino entered the Cage residence. Ino knew the older Kunoichi did not mean to sound rude, and that her unexpected arrival had probably just thrown the poor woman for the loop. Gaara and I are now best buds and are planning our world domination plan together, Ino joked. Oh, and we have decided cookies as the new staple. Gaara snorted. She's a crazy old bat from another dimension who contacted me through the Kyuubi. Temari stared at the two ninja before her, eyes wide. Then she burst out laughing. Okay, I get it. Top secret cage and Konoha business you can't share. No need to make up outlandish stories. I would love some, Ino grinned, not bothering to point out that her story had been the only outlandish one. Gaara, in all his seriousness, had been telling the truth. Still, old bat, really, rude. Gaara did not say anything, but Temari prepared a third cup anyway. So, do you have a place to stay? Temari asked as she handed her brother and the blonde Kunoichi their tea. No, Ino stated, not having considered it. Upon her arrival, Gaara had taken her to his office, and they had spent over a day there. Sleeping arrangements had not even crossed their minds. In fact, sleep had not crossed their minds at all. Temari rolled her eyes. Gaara, you should have offered. The cage took a sip of his tea. Ino, there is a guest room upstairs. Thank you, how considerate, Ino replied, then took a sip of her tea. Temari looked like she wanted to continue speaking, but they were interrupted when the front door slammed open and Kankuro practically stormed inside, scroll in his hand. Gaara, he exclaimed, out of breath. His gaze fell on Ino and he looked taken aback by her presence. Hello. Ino waved. Hello, Kankuro. What is it, Kankuro? Temari asked, knowing that her brother would not have stormed into the room if it wasn't serious. Before he could respond, Gaara's eyes widened. Ino knew what that meant, he had heard his brother's thoughts. But Kankuro managed to catch his breath before Gaara had the chance to say anything. Konoha has been attacked, and completely destroyed. The buzz that echoed through Ino was uncomfortable, even though she was not entirely surprised. She had expected that Konoha would be attacked by the Akatsuki eventually, but so soon. This meant that Tsunade was A sudden jolt of pain in her stomach snapped Ino from her thoughts. She gasped and doubled over. Are you all right, Ino? Temari asked, alarmed. The older Kunoichi had abandoned her tea and was now kneeling next to the younger Kunoichi. Yes, Ino breathed. I'm fine. Just shocked, I think. Maybe you need some fresh air. Temari suggested. Ino nodded. Yes, that sounds good. She allowed Temari to help her up and outside. Once she settled on a bench outside the house, Ino allowed her mind to wander again. If this attack was anything like the one that had happened in her dimension, then Tsunade was unconscious. Soon, Danzo would be elected as a sixth Hokage candidate. And he would travel to the Land of Iron for the Cage Summit. Ino groaned as another jolt of pain shot through her stomach. It was like the cramps she had during her menses, only 10 times worse. Oh, shit. Ino looked down at her stomach, horrified. Oh no, no, no. Please don't let it be a miscarriage, Ino silently prayed. In her current situation, she was surprised the baby had managed to hold on for so long. Fighting back tears, Ino knew in that moment that she had to stop running. With Tsunade out of the picture, her presence, if Danzo learned of it, could become a problem. She was not of this world. No matter how much she wanted to run back to Konoha to help rebuild, it was not her place. Naruto was there. It would be fine. The sooner she reversed the 5 dimensions to heaven, the sooner she could try and save her baby. Maybe it wasn't a miscarriage yet. Maybe, if she could somehow make the baby whole again, it could still be saved. It was time she undid that seal on her memories. With 16-year-old Ino, Naruto opened the door and walked in, his head held high. He noticed that everyone had already arrived. One of the Anbu stationed at the door nodded at him when he passed. Naruto smirked. Nobody other than he knew that the Anbu wearing the weasel mask was actually Sasuke. And that despite no longer being Anbu, he was there in case something went wrong. They had both agreed it would be best if Sasuke was practically invisible, just so that no suspicions would be raised. Good afternoon, Naruto greeted when he reached his seat. Thank you, all, for coming. The High Council was now in session. And Naruto was going to start the meeting with a bang. I would like to start this meeting with a very simple order, Naruto stated as he sat down. He glanced at Sasuke, who nodded curtly. He then turned back to the council. You are all fired. Awkward. That was what the silence in the room felt like. Hinata glanced at the door, wondering if it was still possible for her to leave. When her gaze returned to the Kunoichi opposite her, however, she shook her head. No, she could not give up now. She hadn't even done anything. Naruto believed she could do this. But how does one talk to their daughter from another dimension? The daughter you had no idea existed. The daughter your alternate self apparently had with the first man you ever loved. Hinata had no idea. Astra, no, Hoshiko, was still curled up in the corner of the room. But she had moved her head so she could see better, and as a result Hinata could now see her face. It never occurred to her before, but now that she knew whom the woman was, she could see it. Naruto's face. Hoshiko had Naruto's face. How had Hinata missed that? Her heart clenched. She had not carried this child in her womb, but another version of her had. This woman was still her child, in a way. And she felt the sorrow for her child. Sorrow that the child had suffered. Sorrow that the child was now a diagnosed schizophrenic. Sorrow that her child may never recover. How could she even begin to have a conversation with the woman? Is it a boy or a girl? Came a timid voice. Hinata blinked, surprised that Hoshiko would be the one to break the silence. She had honestly expected that she would have to do all the talking, once she managed to get words out. A girl, Hinata finally managed to mutter. This seemed to excite Hoshiko, for a small glitter of some sort appeared in her lifeless eyes. A girl. Hinata nodded. Yes. Her name is Madoka. You already have a name. Of course, Hinata said and smiled. Hoshiko seemed fascinated. Does it hurt? What? Giving birth? Hinata asked. Hoshiko shook her head. Carrying a baby. Hinata frowned, and looked down at her round belly. With a smile she gently rubbed the bulge and shook her head. Not at all. A lie, but the baby kicking, constant bladder problems and aching back was worth it in the end. Hoshiko looked down at Hinata's feet. My mother died before she could have another baby. Hinata bit her lip. You miss her. Hoshiko did not respond. What about your father? Hinata asked. He also died. Hinata blanched. Oh. Hoshiko's arms around her legs tightened. He was a drunk. Became one after mother died. Hinata could not picture Naruto as an alcoholic. But he was still a good Hokage, Hoshiko continued. He wanted to make it so that children could have longer childhoods. Hinata smiled. That sounded like Naruto. He liked ramen, Hoshiko whispered. The one with salt. Always ate one bowl and let me have as many as I liked. Hinata chuckled. Salt ramen was not the favorite for the Naruto she knew, but to think his alternate self still liked ramen. How very typical. You must really love him, Hinata said. Hoshiko remained quiet. Hinata sighed. She had to sway the conversation. She was here for a reason, after all. As much as she'd like to just sit and listen to Hoshiko's stories, there was no time. Not now. Hoshiko, Hinata began, I am here today, because I have a favor to ask. Hoshiko's brows furrowed. A favor? Hinata nodded. Yes. I'm been informed that you are capable of mind manipulation. Hoshiko's face contorted in anger. I am not your slave. Hinata jumped at the sudden outburst. I did not say that, Hoshiko. The anger seemed to fade a little, and Hoshiko sighed. Why would I think you are a slave? Hinata asked, eyes wide. When the Lady Hokage got sick, she could no longer cast mind manipulation herself. She made me do it for her, was the reply. Hinata had no idea who Lady Hokage was. Tsunade. No, she could not cast mind manipulation. I don't want you to cast it, Hinata reassured the unstable Kunoichi. I want you to end it. Hoshiko blinked, and the anger melted away. End it? You mean I can? Yes. You've got it activated right now, don't you? On the High Council. Hoshiko stared at Hinata blankly, and then suddenly stood. The demeanor of a small, injured child was all Hinata could see, which was a shock. She was so used to Hoshiko being Astra, the mature, aloof and proud seamstress. Where had she gone? Could someone truly be so drastically changed? Okay, the Kunoichi whispered. But you'll have to get the doctor to remove the chakra seals on my wrist. What? Really? Hinata asked, surprised. Hoshiko nodded. Once Hinata had called the doctor to remove the seals temporarily, Hoshiko moved towards the bed, where she sat down and formed her hands into the seal of the ram. The mind manipulation I cast for Ayaka bends to her will. Once I dispel it, she will lose her connection to it, Hoshiko explained. Hinata nodded. That is what we are hoping for. How does she use it herself, if it is your technique? It responds to her chakra, which she projects through her voice. Hinata's eyes widened. That sounded familiar, like a mind-altering genjutsu Shikamaru had described several years before that he had been drawn into. Hoshiko closed her eyes, and the air shifted as she gathered chakra to dispel the technique. Hinata watched, absolutely stunned. How had it been so easy? How on earth had she managed to convince a mentally unstable Kunoichi to do as she asked? Why? Hinata mumbled. Hoshiko opened her eyes, and frowned. Why? What? Why did you agree to easily? I thought I'd have to fight tooth and nail with you. Hoshiko smiled, the first warm smile Hinata had ever seen on her face. You're my mother, of course I was going to listen. The silence was deafening. Naruto had expected more of a reaction, to be honest. Anger, maybe, but the members of the High Council simply stared at him in absolute silence. The only person who did not seem to be stunned was Shimura Ayaka. But that was to be expected. The anger on her face was exactly what Naruto had predicted. The silence continued, and then young Hyuga Moritsugu, who stood, and in his nervousness, sent his chair clattering to the floor, broke the silence. The sound echoed through the room, and all eyes turned to him. Naruto liked Moritsugu. He was the youngest member on the council, had none of that silly old Hyuga nonsense in his head, and sometimes stuttered. A bit like Hinata used to. It was adorable. It was a shame that he had fallen victim to Shimura Ayaka's malice. I do not understand, Moritsugu said. What do you mean we are fired? Yes, Ayaka's shrill voice joined in. You have no sanction to just dismiss us, Lord Hokage. Actually, Naruto hummed as he pulled out the scroll he had the daimyo approve, I do. The daimyo has agreed that your dismissal is required. Gasps erupted among the council members. May I ask why, Lord Hokage? Moritsugu asked. Naruto sighed, and then waved his hand. It was the signal he was to give Sasuke to bring in the documents of evidence he had gathered. Sasuke had been anticipating the signal, and with poof vanished, only to return seconds later with the documents under his arm. He dropped them unceremoniously on the large table. Naruto fought the urge to roll his eyes. Where shall I begin? Naruto asked as he sank down in his chair and leaned on the armrest, allowing his chin to rest on his hand. The beginning usually works, Lord Hokage, a woman seated in the middle stated. Naruto recognized her immediately. She was one of the only 2 council members he had failed to dish out any evidence for treason out for. Yes, thank you, Hinoko, Naruto retorted. The woman crinkled her nose. Soku, Lord Hokage, how many times must I tell you? Naruto sighed again. Maybe he should have accepted Shikamaru's offer to let him join in the initial confrontation. For some ungodly reason, Shikamaru was the only one Hinoko, Soku, listened to. He had a feeling it had to do with that mission they had done together several years earlier, but he never dared to ask. Shikamaru did not like to remember that particular mission. Honestly, Naruto did not blame him. The cleanup had been tiring. Naruto cleared his throat and opened some of the manila folders containing the documents he had gathered. It has come to my attention, he began, that all of you have been acting behind my back. He received blank stares, and one very vicious glare. Ayaka was not doing very well with hiding her emotions, something he was sure her uncle would not be impressed by, if he had been alive. Had she really completely lost her composure already? Was seeing Kurama once really all it took? He should have summoned the fox earlier. Moritsugu, who had still been standing, realized he was starting to look like an idiot. He quickly grabbed his chair and sat down again. Naruto waited for him to be settled before continuing. I know, Naruto stated. I know about the intercepted letters. I know about the bugs in my office. I also know that you have been keeping an eye on my wife and children. Still blank stares. Naruto frowned. Had Hinata not been successful? Naruto continued. I also know that you have been going behind my back and spreading stories. Several villagers have admitted that they have heard about plans to overthrow me. Villagers who have pretended to be on your side because you threatened their loved ones. Are you saying we have all committed treason? Nara Engetsu asked. Naruto turned his attention to the man, and blinked when he realized the Yamanaka seat next to the Nara one was empty. Naruto frowned. How had he missed that when he entered? Where is Izumi? He asked. Last I heard, Ayaka supplied, she was in hospital. For what? Naruto asked, flabbergasted. Some sort of injury, Ayaka stated with a shrug. But Naruto did not miss the glint in her eyes. Shit. Naruto quickly quelled his panic. No, he could not falter here. Ayaka may think she one-upped him by attacking one of his own, but he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of making her think she won. But still, he worried. Izumi was the other council member with no evidence against her name, which meant she might have been able to escape the mind manipulation in its early stages. She was, after all, a Yamanaka. Why she had failed to alert him of the situation, however, still baffled him. Can we get back onto the topic? Soku demanded. I'd like to know where all these accusations are coming from, you know. Naruto nodded. Right, yes. He would assure Izumi was safe after the High Council session ended. With that, he passed the documents to the person on his right in motion to pass it on. One by one, everyone looked at them, and as the documents moved around the table, Naruto started to notice the panic on everyone's faces. Moritsugu was the first to react verbally. I would never say such a thing about Lady Hinata. Ah, Naruto thought. He saw the transcript of one of Ayaka's private meetings. Naruto grimaced. Probably best not to repeat what Moritsugu and the others had said about Hinata in that instance. It wasn't pretty. This continued as more documents got passed along, and the panic on everyone's faces got worse. Even Soku, who had nothing against her, looked stricken. But Naruto was more interested in Ayaka's reaction. She was, naturally, fuming. But somehow had managed to regain some control on her emotions, as she had not yet lashed out. I don't understand, Moritsugu whimpered. Why would I do all these things? I don't understand either, Engetsu agreed. Some of the things here go completely against my own principles. Why would I, unless I was being controlled? At the Nara's words, the room went quiet. Thoughtful expressions crossed most faces as the words sunk in. Naruto had to fight the urge to smile. Of course the Nara in the room would hit the nail on the head. Why were all of them so bloody smart? And if they were questioning their actions, did it mean Hinata had been successful after all? Just as that thought crossed Naruto's mind, Ayaka stood up. She moved so fast and with so much force, that her chair toppled, and like before with Moritsugu, the noise caught everybody's attention. She then proceeded to slam her hands on the table, making it shake. From the corner of his eye, Naruto saw Sasuke tense. Are all of you just going to sit here, she demanded angrily, and accept this idiot's accusations as the truth? Nobody dared to reply. This just infuriated the kunoichi further, and the blood rushed to her head. This man, she shrieked and pointed at Naruto, is a buffoon. Like all his predecessors, he is filled with sentimental shit and does not realize that his stupidity is putting us all in danger. Engetsu looked like he wanted to object to that, but Ayaka glared at him coldly. You, Nara, you should be ashamed that you follow him. Uzumaki Naruto is a disgrace. All the Hokage like him have created nothing but problems. And what are these problems, exactly? Soku asked. Her eyes narrowed. Ayaka's face somehow got redder, if that was possible. He released the Biju. Like they are harmless pets. He has the audacity to call them his friends. Do I have to remind you all that the Kyuubi destroyed Konoha? Over 30 years ago, Engetsu muttered. Bloody long time ago if you ask me. Ayaka ignored him. This so-called peace we have is an illusion. We are all still shinobi. If we cannot live as such, what is the point of our existence? One day, another power will arise, because they always will. We are not prepared, and this idiot's tendency to talk things through will get us all killed. So what? Soku demanded. Correct me if I am wrong, but Lord Hokage's talking things through with his enemies is the reason we are all still alive. Your uncle's way of doing things got himself killed before he could even be named Hokage properly. That appeared to be the last straw for Ayaka. Naruto was not entirely sure what it was that changed in the room, but the air suddenly felt heavy and suffocating. Sasuke, who had been tense throughout Ayaka's entire speech, disappeared from his spot by the door and appeared next to Naruto. Kunai ready. You will not disrespect me. Ayaka yelled, her voice carrying a strange echo to it. You will do as I say. Kill him. At that she pointed at Naruto, and the room became even more tense. And then Soku burst out laughing. You're joking, right? Ayaka looked perplexed at Soku's laughter. No, I am serious. Soku sobered somewhat, and straightened. You honestly think you can waltz in here and try and manipulate me with that chakra in your voice? Oh no, no, I've fallen victim to a mind-altering genjutsu before, no way am I doing it again. Gaps erupted among the council members. Angetsu, in particular, looked angry. So it is true. You've been controlling us all this time. Ayaka stepped back, the anger on her face now replaced with confusion and fear. Why isn't it working? She demanded. But nobody was listening. Every member of the council was now turning on Ayaka, their intent clear in their expressions. And Ayaka knew that she was in trouble. She was, after all, outnumbered. So she did what any kunoichi in her position would do. She ran. Stop her! Soku yelled, although she really did not need to order anyone in the room. Several of the shinobi were already following. She had failed. Shimura Ayaka believed herself to be a controlled, prideful individual. Everything she had ever done was for her uncle. Ever since she was a little girl she had worshipped him. He was a true shinobi, a man who understood that sacrifices needed to be made for peace. Why did nobody else understand that? She could feel the tears forming as she ran down the stairs of the Hokage building. Crying was a sign of weakness and she had sworn she would never shed them again after her uncle died. She had sworn it on his grave. She had even failed him in that. She knew she was being followed. And if there was one thing she knew about Konoha shinobi, then it was that soon everyone in the village would know of what happened. A manhunt would begin and she would not be safe. Not until she got far away from the shinobi union. Which was impossible, of course. The shinobi union was no longer compromised of only the 5 great nations and the land of iron. Many smaller villages have joined, and some daimyo of the smaller countries have also signed the treaty. There was literally nowhere she could run. But she ran anyway. There she is. A voice called. Shit, Ayaka thought. Had she slowed down? When, increasing her speed, despite the protest of her muscles, she rounded a corner and spotted the doors. Yes. But just as that tiny sliver of relief settled, it vanished when a tall shadow towered over her. A pair of vermilion eyes connected with hers and with a shriek she tried to turn on her heel to run in the opposite direction. She would rather die by the hands of the idiots she had been controlling, than him. But as always, the bloody bastard was too fast. He grabbed her arms and pulled her towards him. Whoa there, Ayaka, Kurama purred. Where are you running so desperately to? She struggled against his tight grip, fear boiling in her blood. There were not many things she feared, not even death. But put the Kyuubi before her, and she trembled. Such unnatural power, such evil, should not exist. And to think the Hokage called the beast his friend. She spat in his face. Kurama blinked, then grinned. Oh, feisty. Always knew you were one of those type of women. Ayaka growled, but Kurama seemed far too amused to even flinch at her demeanor. Oi, fox man, a female voice yelled from the direction Ayaka had come. Keep her still. Kurama did as told, by pulling Ayaka's arm tightly towards him. She continued struggling, but her movements were severely restricted. Just as she wondered what was going to happen next, Soku appeared from around the corner, her right arm lifted. And then she flicked her wrist, and Ayaka flinched before falling limp in Kurama's arms. He blinked as the woman sagged. Wow, what did you do? Paralyzed her with a chakra needle, Soku replied as she came to a halt and rested her hands on her knees to catch her breath. Nice, Kurama hummed. I like you. Thanks, Soku muttered, just as Angetsu, Moritsugu, Sasuke and Naruto joined them. Oh, well done, Kurama. Naruto grinned as he patted his friend's shoulder. Kurama shrugged. You called me here for this very reason, no? Yes, but still, Naruto replied. Thank you. Kurama shook his head, then looked down at the paralyzed woman in his arms. She was still conscious, but literally could not move anything but her eyes. So, Kurama said in a sing-song voice. What do I do with this one?